Tony Kevin, Ambassador Kevin, is on the line. Hallelujah. Let's go to him now.
Good.
Ambassador,
Good
thank
morning,
you
George.
for that. Now everything is very clear. Good morning to you. Given the hour, I'll press on quickly, Excellency. There was two things I wanted to ask you, although one additional PS. Let me deal with the first one. Australia, how did it become such a slavish servant of the United States government, thousands and thousands of miles away, that it is prepared to risk war with its major trading partner and relatively near neighbor, China? How did that happen? When did it happen?
George, many books will be written about this. It's partly history and it's partly bad luck. The history is that since World War II, Australia has been dazzled by American power and American glamour. An American official who's unnamed said, Australia's an easy lay. And I think that's the 5-word answer to your question. We're an easy lay, as Americans see us.
Well,
we want to be like
yeah,
them.
It's a depressing enough answer. It was bad enough when you were an easy lay for us in Blighty, but to be an easy lay for Joe Biden is a recipe for dissatisfaction, if ever I heard one. But the slavishness is so against your own interest. I mean, if I was China, I'll tell you frankly, if I was the leader of China, I wouldn't buy another thing that is grown in or made by an Australian hand. I'd actually say, go to hell, Australia. Instead, they buy huge amounts of your exports.
This is all true, but we have been deeply penetrated politically, economically, culturally, psychologically by America over the last 20 or 30 years. We had a brief window of independence, of sovereignty, from the time Gough Whitlam came to power to the time Paul Keating lost power to John Howard. In those 20 years, we were actually finding our home in Asia and establishing an identity for ourselves, a very attractive multicultural identity. But now we have timorously and timidly gone back into the American lager. And we don't need regime change in Australia. We're already deeply penetrated. And I have to emphasise this. I think much is the same is true of England, I would dare to say, and also of Germany. So we have all gone back to lackey status, to this strange globalist imperialist regime in Washington that doesn't seem to care that America is falling apart around it. They're in their gated suburbs. They live very well, this little 1%. They want to rule the world, and Australia is just coming along, wagging its tail and saying, please, pat me on the head. What do you want me to do next? And that's where we are, unfortunately.
The other issue I wanted to talk to you about was Poland, because of your expertise in relation to that. As I was saying earlier, I have the reverse of animus towards Polish people. But I'm damn sure I'm not going to allow them to drag me into World War III. And there's a growing feeling, in France especially, but also in Germany and to some extent in the UK, that countries like Poland, Romania another one, and these yapping Baltic states are driving the policy towards the Ukraine war, dragging Europe and NATO into cataclysmic war. Do you share that apprehension? And is there anyone in Poland, is there any force in Poland that is equally apprehensive about it?
I'm not quite as apprehensive as you are at this moment. I do think, although there is a fanatical Russophobia in Poland, and always has been, there's also an element of rationality. And when the Poles look and see how Ukraine has been destroyed by this war, I'm fairly confident in their ultimate common sense that they won't let the same thing happen to them, because they must know that the same facts of economics and geography and demographics apply to them in relation to Russia as applied to Ukraine. America had 8 years to prepare Ukraine for war against Russia. America wanted Ukraine to go to war against Russia. They thought that Ukraine could win and establish some sort of dynamic towards regime change in Russia. They were wrong on every count. So why should they try it again with Poland? I think there's enough rationality in Washington and Warsaw for this not to happen. And I think that the Ukrainian war will now drive itself to its tragic conclusion. And it really is a tragic conclusion. A fine country has been destroyed by their own fault and by the Americans' fault in abusing them against Russia. And this is criminal behavior. And I want to make a point here, George. It's a very important point. The Americans, I mean the globalist power elite in Washington, now see this war as a win-win for them, because whatever they lose, and they don't lose anything, their military-industrial complex just makes newer and better weapons. The Ukrainians lose 500,000 people, 500,000 men. For the Americans of this particular frame of mind, it's win-win, because a dead Ukrainian is almost as good as a dead Russian. Because if the Russians are going to take control of Ukraine anyway, the weaker you make Ukraine demographically and in terms of infrastructure, the less you're giving Russia at the end of the day. So there we go. Heads we win, tails you lose. I'm sure this is the way Biden looks at it, and it's a horrible, evil way to look at it, but I believe this is the case.
Now, finally, I may say this has been a late interview and will therefore have to be a shorter one, but I'm mightily impressed by the quality of it, so we'll definitely ask you back. But briefly, if you will, given the hour, I wanted to ask you about, if you like, a broader question. Notice that we both approved of a statement that we saw on social media today, which, to paraphrase, said, you hate Russia because Russia is what you used to be, at least what you wanted to be, a cohesive society, a society where family values, where patriotic feeling, where a lack of wokeness, if you like, to cut to the chase, a socially conservative country, which actually most people in most countries want to be in. I'm talking to you tonight from Serbia. I'm moving on tomorrow, but here in Serbia, the same is true. And the people here feel that they are disliked by the globalists and their power centers because, like Russia, they are a country like we used to be. If I'm right in saying that you and I both kind of endorse that perspective, please say why.
I'm glad to, and if you can give me a little time, I'll expand on this. I know Russia pretty well, and apart from my family connections in Australia, which of course are vital to me, my family ultimately is what counts for me, I feel more at home in Russia than I do in Australia at this moment. And that's a dreadful thing to admit. I find myself going back to English literature, back to 19th century Trollope. I'm really enjoying the Palliser novels at the moment. But even more recent English literature, the literature of the 1930s, Graham Greene, Aldous Huxley, Evelyn Waugh, I feel at home there. precisely because of what you say. We were a society that had some pretty clear moral values, some pretty clear integrity. We're lost in confusion now, and Russia is standing for those things that we used to stand for, and I'm very proud to say that. My book, Return to Moscow, which I wrote in 2016, 2 years after Maidan, I didn't realize then what was coming, but in a kind of a way, I predicted all of this. It's a book that, reading it 6 or 7 years later now, and it's still available, really tells us something about the Russians. They're good people. They're a noble people. They're an intelligent people. They're a courageous people. And we used to be all those things. But we've got lost, George, and I just hope we can find ourselves again.